Will you be there when the stars align?
Before we begin, thank you very much to Godzillatronus for joining the Patreon campaign. Thank you very much for the support. Thank you for contributing. Patreon, very, very important to keeping this channel up and keeping the daily content coming. I do appreciate everybody who can pitch in a buck or two to make it happen. So, today we are looking at the bad stuff. This is a harkening back to my plastic addict roots, where I will go on about how much I dislike certain figures. Now, I want to point out, I do think Legacy in and of itself is a really good toy line. I do think we got a lot of really good toys. In fact, I would say that at one level or another, none of these toys on this list are bad. Like especially if we're thinking of like what it takes to qualify for Plastic Addict, no, I don't think any of them are bad. But it's by process of elimination. 10 of them have to be the worst, right? I genuinely feel you have to acknowledge the bad so you can appreciate the good. That was the whole point of Plastic Addict to begin with, to make fun of people hyper-criticizing everything. So instead, today we're going to look at the toys that are not great, and we will acknowledge that. And I want to point out, they are not great for a lot of different reasons. You know, there are toys on here that are good, but just one thing is done so badly, we have to talk about it. So, with that being said, we're going to look at the entire trilogy. Now that every toy has passed and been released, let us count down the 10 worst toys of Transformers Legacy. When I concepted this list, I knew that one of the not Transformer Prime toys would end up on this list. It was just a matter of which one. And to be honest with you, it was RC that I never really liked. I mean, Bulkhead doesn't really represent his character very well. He's mostly just boring as a figure. You know, there's not a lot going on in him transformation-wise. And then Knockout is at least a little bit better. Like, he actually seems to fit the mold decently. It's still not him. It's certainly not Knockout, but I've seen worse. It could have been way worse than it was. But the RC just never clicked for me. And I've owned this mold multiple times, and it just never works. I'm not a big fan of how loose some of the parts are. In particular, the front end of the motorcycle never stays put on any of the versions I have of this toy. I find the transformation to be clunky and just not really as intuitive as I would like. And the overall representation is not great. You know, I don't even get her body shape out of this toy. It just seems like another character. It feels like this mold was designed as another character and then forcibly repainted in RC the way they would do during the Unicron trilogy. And it just doesn't work here. And by some of the other retools that we've seen of this figure, you can tell they had other characters in mind when they made it. RC just happened to be the first one released. So, like, I know there's people like the mold. Unfortunately, I'm just not one of them. Like, I've owned the toy like 4 times over now, and it just never works for me. So, maybe a personal thing, but I think in general, those Prime toys and Generations, the G1ified Prime toys, they needed more time. Here's one you probably saw lingering at your local Target for months on end because, frankly, in package, in the store, this looked too ugly to buy. We're taking a look at Dinobot from Buzzworthy Bumblebee. This toy itself is good. You know, I think, aside from weird choices like the downturn on the wrists in Beast Mode, I think this is a very, very good Dinobot toy. And then there's that color scheme. Yes, it's the original color scheme from the first Beast Wars toy, but not really. I've been staring at this plucked chicken of a toy and wondering what the difference is, and I think I finally figured it out. I think it's the fact that the dark brown that is painted on is so much more invasive on the original toy. It's larger, it goes down the body more. Here they were trying to skimp on the toy budget a little bit, so the overall toy suffers. It's just way too much of that pink flesh exposed. And also, it doesn't even really strike me as the same type, like the same color. Like, I have the original Dinobot toy. The color is a little bit more muted than this. Like, it's not this, like, lively, fleshy tone. It's just, It's unsettling. Like, it's literally like an unsettling toy to look at, especially with, like, all the sculpted natural details and ridges in the skin. Yeah, good toy, but this is just an example of just how a really, really bad paint job, a really bad color scheme, can absolutely sink a good figure. We talked about that a few times on Plastic Addict, and I tried not to harp on toys just because the color scheme is bad, but in this case, it's downright unpleasant. I admit this one might be on the list because I'm just exhausted of this mold at this point. This is the Gladiator Megatron from the recent San Diego Comic-Con 2-pack with the Orion Pack / Stormbringer Optimus Prime style design. How many times? Like, this mold has been used like 10 times over, and that's not even an exaggeration. And it's always the same. We've got one G2 green one, and then all gray. Just all gray Megatrons in different iterations of Megatron. And it's just so exhausting at this point. And this is the minor Megatron repainted into just a very short-lived appearance in the comic books. And I can understand why they went with a 2-pack, but this just highlights just how long they've been counting on this Megatron mold, and it's just time for it to go. There's so many weaknesses that this toy has, like, the turret section is very poorly constructed, so it's just the arms there. I've never liked how the legs on this toy work, especially the large snap it takes to get the ankles bent. It's just not, it's not a great toy. Like, in no iteration of this toy was really that good, and yet they counted on it for like 6 years. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's more the point. Like, it makes the list mostly because why would you do it again? Like, just do that Optimus Prime, that Orion Pax toy, because that's a really, really good toy, and just solo release it. It didn't need to have yet another iteration of that Megatron. I honestly think it brings the value of the 2-pack down, because the Prime is so good, and then here's another gray Megatron for your pile. Yeah, this is just overdone. The toy is just overdone. I've seen it too many times. Please, Hasbro, never again. I will never not harp on this repaint as being one of the most lazy that Hasbro has ever produced, and the complete lack of care and research into its origins. Velocitron Scourge, I'm going to keep harping on. On the whole, yes, it looks fine as a Nemesis Prime, but it's not supposed to be a Nemesis Prime. It's Scourge on the box. It's the G2 Prime design. It's supposed to be RID Scourge. And then they completely screwed it up. And by the designer's own admission, he just kind of did the normal Nemesis Prime thing to the toy. He didn't even go and look at the origin. He didn't even go look at the source material to see how accurate he was being. Like, okay, congratulations, you got upside down G2 Autobot logos on him for the Destrons from Car Robots. Good work. Where is the gray chest? Where is the sticker detailing, like, or at least a tampograph imitating it in the chest windows and across the shoulders? Where are the proper colors? Why was this so hard? Like, why? Like, I'm, like, just absolutely shocked, like, why? Why can you, like, try to do a brand new version of a super popular character from back in the day, and then screw the color scheme up so badly? All you had to do was look at one photo, one screenshot from the show, and just copy it. That's it. This was not supposed to be difficult. Obviously, there's hope that the mold is redone correctly. I think Hasbro is aware. I think they've even mentioned at times that, like, yeah, we could always go back and do that again, as far as, like, getting this done properly. But right now, it does not look like it. There's so many things coming down the pipe. I really don't think this one's anywhere close to getting fixed. It's one of those that's frustrating because it looks good, but it doesn't look correct. And we have been waiting a long time for a correct RID Scourge to hit again. We missed a huge opportunity here. It makes the list this high because, yeah, this should have been a shoo-in. This is a massive miss. When you're doing a 6-part combiner, there's always going to be one character in the mix that has to suffer for all the others to actually work. And when it's core class size, you're gonna make that toy suffer a lot. Sludge as part of the Dinobots is fine. If you put them all in a row, he looks fine. If you put them all in beast mode, he looks fine. It's when you take the toy as an individual that things really start to fall apart for the figure. So, for starters, extremely low articulation, even for a core class figure. You have those huge pieces of Dino Mode leg hanging off because those have to be the thigh of the combiner. You have the floating leg thing. I hate how the legs on this toy look with that floating thigh inside. Those huge gaps. It just doesn't seem like the legs are even connected to each other. Even the beast mode has its flaws that it really shouldn't. Are you aware that the head on this is mis-sculpted? Yeah, so like the two halves, like the two divisions of the head, they're sculpted differently on both sides. There's a noticeable seam. It's really frustrating. Like, again, it's almost like they like fixed the tooling on one half and then forgot to fix the tooling on another. You know, it seems like literally every part of this toy ended up being an afterthought, all for the sake of making the pelvis of Volcanicus. And you know what? Fine. I know that you're going to make a toy suffer when it's the pelvis piece of a combiner. We saw that in Combiner Wars Devastator. You know, that's a really ugly piece. We see it in modern 6-piece combiners, where both Devastator and Lyokaiser avoid the entire topic altogether by having an individual pelvis that's not transformable. Here, Sludge had to suffer. And again, in the group, he's fine. He's sacrificing for the team. If you bought this toy on his own, if you were a Sludge fan who just really wanted a pocket-sized Sludge to sit on your desk and keep you company across the day, you deserved better. Remember when I talked about how repaints worked in the Unicron trilogy era, where things were homaging past characters? They kind of worked, but some of them ended up being really, really clever, and it actually worked really, really well. And then others ended up being just, why did you think this would work? Buzzworthy Tow-Line is one of those, why did you think this would work? So, for starters, I'm not a fan of this mold in general. This is one of those where I don't think, no matter which version of this mold I have ever messed with, I don't think that this toy ever stayed intact during transformation. I don't think I've ever, I have other remolds. Like, I have, Axle Grease and Lockdown, the car retool of this one. And I couldn't keep them together then during transformation. You know, it's frustrating. And it's not even parts that were supposed to separate. The elbows on this mold are terrible and are prone to coming apart pretty easily. If you hear in the background, my dog does not like this mold either. And that goes along with just the overall paint job itself. Now, keep in mind, I mean, it's RID 2000, it's RID 2001 Tow-Line. It's going to have the garish green and light blue. There's no avoiding that. But it does feel very forced into this mold just because they wanted to do some kind of tow truck repaint. And rather than going with something that's like Machine Wars that would have suited the Mad Max aesthetic a lot better, they went with Tow-Line, meaning we have bright orange roll bars on his windshields for some reason. And, it's what's supposed to be like a normal, helpful tow truck Autobot is armed for the apocalypse. Like, it's frustrating. It's not a repaint that works. It's not a mold that suits the character, especially for the character's personality. It's way too sharp. It's way too aggressive. It just feels like they threw RID fans a bone because they just happen to have a tow truck lying around. Otherwise, yeah, this one just did not work for me in the least. Personal preference thing, yeah, but judging by how many I saw shelf warming at Target, I'm going to assume a lot of people felt the same way. This one should not be this high up on the list, admittedly, but at this point I feel like a personal vendetta is being taken out on me. Why is every breakdown toy terrible? Why is this character just doomed to have really bad toys every single time he's released? When he was the when they did the Titans Return, no, the Combiner Wars. I'm getting myself backwards here. I'm so upset about this toy. When they did the Combiner Wars toy, he was the worst one in the entire line. Like, nothing about him felt good. And when they went and did this one, half of the vehicle is hanging off of his back, and instead of letting it fold up into this nice little backpack that would have been out of the way, they gave it useless transformation steps, as if to try to make it spread out to avoid the kibble of his windshield. His windshield, which also could have absolutely been engineered to fold onto his back a lot better than it does, instead just hanging off as this constantly, like, flowing butt flap. The toy itself is just messy, and I think because it's using so much of its mass in the backpack, I feel like the rest of the toy just doesn't feel as good as other figures even in his combiner group. Dragstrip I feel is a far better toy than this one. I don't know why. I don't know why this one, I don't know why Breakdown always ends up bad. Like, right down to things like, we didn't want to split the spoiler in vehicle mode and leave it on the back of his legs, so we made this blade boomerang thing that he can't really use in any practical way? I don't know. Everything about this toy annoys me. It just comes across really, really sloppy. It just comes across like they just had to just throw something together just to get the character out there. I feel like, engineering-wise, he's one of the more disappointing combiner characters in recent years. And the fact that he got retooled into Wild Rider, so he had to double up on the flaws on this mold, that hurts a lot too. I recently sold off this figure on my eBay sales, which, yes, are still ongoing and probably will be for the next couple of weeks. Cheap plug. But messing with it again to cram it into a box reminded me, I do not have fun with this toy, and it's a shame because it's an expensive one. So, here's the thing. Cybertron Metroplex's entire design concept was tall. What can we do to make a Transformer as tall as possible at the leader class price point? And the sacrifice to that is the fact that his transformation was largely made up of just normal articulation points across his body, and there's very little actual transformation going on. You could argue the vehicle mode, especially in the original, just kind of looks like someone doing some weird yoga pose, with a bucket wheel on the back of them. That's the only thing that makes them look like some kind of vehicle. A bucket wheel, which, by the way, has never been able to reach the ground. You throw in a work mode because, well, we have to make it do something else. The original toy did that too, just kind of like a fake triple changer. It's really just stopping halfway in between transformation and sticking some weapons on, which makes him look even sillier than the original mode. No, when you put him into the Titan line, the whole concept of the character, make him tall for the budget, completely goes away because he's just as tall as any of the other Titans, if not a little bit shorter than some of them. So you don't get that vibe anymore. You don't get the whole point of the design. And then when you put it compared to some of the other ones that can turn into bases for Micromasters or even Legends class toys, or they have like a proper third mode that's cool, like, when you start putting it into perspective like that, like, it really doesn't feel like he has the play value to justify his price, and his transformation certainly does not feel like a Titan class price point. It just feels like it was there just to fill out the line, and it's unfortunate. Like, I love my Cybertron, but this is one of my least favorite figures and designs from the entire thing, and when you take away their whole reason for the design, he's not really all that special anymore. Here's one that might just be me, because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about it, but I never could enjoy this figure. This one just always put me off. Trashmaster seemed like a really good idea. Let's introduce a Voyager into this whole combining Iser gimmick that we have with the deluxes, so you can have a bigger piece to play with. And on paper, that seems absolutely great. I would love to have more combination options, and I am aware there's some things you can do with it. But by and large, I feel that getting him to work in the ecosystem of the other deluxes is really difficult. He doesn't break down into enough parts, and his parts just don't have nearly as many uses as I would expect. You know, it all feels just incredibly limited by what they can do. And as an overall figure, he kind of suffers the same thing of Bulkhead, where it's just kind of a boring design. Like, he really doesn't have a whole lot of interesting transformation or look going on to him. He's just like a basic burly robot. You know, and I like my big, heavy proportion robots, but this one just never hit for me. You know, and then you throw in the parts where, like, yeah, he's got, you know, little parts that don't want to stay attached. You know, like I'm struggling to keep them together during transformation. That one might just be mine, but it doesn't help that that was my first impression of the toy. It's a cool idea. Like, it's a cool idea, but he just doesn't have enough work with for this entire design point. I can never really get anything truly satisfying out of him and the other Junkions, which is a shame because they're the only Isers, for lack of a better term for them, that actually had the idea of just keeping most of them in the same color scheme so the parts all fit together better and what you build looks good. Nothing I ever built with this guy looked good. It all just kind of looked crammed together, and that's unfortunate. Again, great idea. They really should have done better on it. Overall, just a very forgettable figure in the end. At number 1, we have a very misguided figure in Legacy, and like of all the toys I mess with out of this line, I was more disappointed with this than any of them, and that would be Squeezeplay. Going with the Mind Wipe mold as the retool was immediately a mistake. It forced a lot of extremely weird proportion choices. His legs are way too small and don't fit the original shape. His shoulders are sunken way too far into his body. His arms cannot pose at their original positions. The cowl part, you know, like that crustacean shell behind his head, cannot fit flush to the body. You can hinge it down so that it can kind of connect, but it leaves this massive gap between the head and shoulders that should not exist. You know, and then you get to the robot mode and I realize, wow, they really didn't freshen up this toy. The joint tolerances on mine felt terrible. Like, just not pleasant at all. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad that they paid some of the lesser known headmasters a little bit of love here, but it does feel just like, it just feels like a half-hearted attempt, you know? Like I didn't enjoy this toy the way I was really hoping to. I was excited to get the more obscure headmaster out there. You know, and I was kind of excited they were going to do something a little bit out of the norm and get to more obscure things. But the execution on this is absolutely terrible. Like, you know, it doesn't matter how you try to upsell it. The beast mode is just a pale imitation of like how his original one looked, and the robot is kind of a loose jointed mess. Overall, just really, really disappointing. And I know some Squeezeplay fans out there. I can't imagine you were satisfied with what you ultimately got. Waited, 30 plus years to get that new toy, and this is it? Really? It feels like a space filler. It feels like it was there to check a box. And that's unfortunate because this is a box that they're likely never going to go back and recheck. It is what it is. At best, you can hope that someone out there makes a really big deal out of Squeezeplay in a comic book someday, and we might have a run at a better figure. But for now, out of everything in the Legacy trilogy, this is the toy I had the least amount of fun with. And yeah, I really, really don't like this figure. And that is going to do it. So remember, try to keep it on point. I really like to be more positive than this on the channel these days. We acknowledge that there are bad toys out there, but that does mean that the good ones are, far better looking, and that's just how that works. So enjoy the good, but keep in mind the bad. It could always be a lot worse in the Transformer game. So that is the list. Feel free to disagree with it in the comments below. And as always, I will see you next time.
The day is getting closer. My journey is almost over. And when it is, our journey begins. The question is, when the stars align, will you be there?